My name is Yoki, and I'm on the Vancouver Startup Week team. And I would just like to take this moment to acknowledge that we are grateful to be virtually gathered on Indigenous land, regardless of where you're joining us from. And I am grateful to be on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. And I'm privileged to live, work, and play on these lands. So first, we'd like to thank you all for joining us at VSW 2021, and welcome to How to Price Your Solution, hosted by ClassyNarwhal. This session is part of the VSW Founder Track and is proudly supported by Sage Accountant. Sage knows you didn't start up your business to become an accountant. Sorry to all the accountants out there. Sage Accounting keeps your business organized and running smoothly. So track your cash flow, send out invoices, and get paid quickly. Visit the Sage Accounting booth to access free guides and templates for starting your business finances the right way. Plus, get an exclusive VSW discount if you're ready to switch from Excel. So if you have any questions, like we mentioned before, please post them in the Q&A in Whova, and you can also upvote questions there. And I'll now pass this along to Chin, and we'll begin.
Great, wonderful. Nice to meet you all, and thanks for joining. So let's dive right into today's topic of pricing. Let's talk about money. A few quick things. I will tend to speak quite quickly. So if you have any questions, feel free to jump in. I can also send the slides at the end. So if you miss out on anything, just let me know. But I will be unapologetic about being quick. The reason why I like to speak quickly is I assume that you are all smart people. So let's just give you a lot of rich information. And if anyone misses out on anything, I'm always happy to provide more clarification and help and provide more support as well. So let's jump into it. Pricing. A bit about myself, my background. You can just call me Chin, like Chin. I run a company called ClassyNarwhal. It's a startup and sales consultancy. I used to work in the startup support scene in Vancouver. So I spent the last 5 years working for a social venture incubator accelerator known as Spring. Some of you might have seen or attended some of the other sessions that Spring has been hosting. So I've been there for the last 5 years, and I left actually last year in March to set out on my own to start my own business. This is actually my third business, so having a lot of fun doing it so far. And it's definitely a trying and challenging time to study in the midst of COVID. So my specialization is mostly around sales, revenue optimization, process optimization, automation, those kind of things. So happy to chat about any of those topics if they are of interest to you. In the last 5 years, I've probably worked with over 500 different startups, all the way from food and beverage companies to tech companies to high-end innovative products like ski equipment, clothing lines. So pretty much you name it. So I think what I want to share today is kind of share some of the best practices around how to come up with pricing, how to optimize your price, and how to figure out how you can maximize your revenue as well. I'll also be bringing in some of the insights that I had from my corporate experience prior to being in the startup world, where I was mostly dealing with sales management, and revenue. So I'll be sharing some of those insights when we talk about pricing as well. So key outcomes, I think we covered these. So how to set, how to test and optimize, and then how to increase your revenue as well. So first of all, let's quickly talk about product market fit. A lot of people in the startup world have heard of the term of product market fit. I would say that product market fit is important, but what a lot of people tend to overlook is that pricing nowadays is actually a lot more important than you think it is. It used to be that investors will be happily willing to invest in any company that's growing really, really well. But as you have seen, if you've tried to go out to raise capital, investors nowadays are a lot more conservative, and it's a lot harder to raise capital than it used to be. You can't just be like the Facebook and say, hey, you know what, we have a lot of users and we want to raise capital. Nowadays, investors want to see, or at least have some rough line of sight on what is your revenue model, how are you planning on making money. And even better, if you already have some revenue, that gives them a lot of confidence and it takes away some of the risks. So a lot of investors tend to care about that. So growth is important, but I would say that growth and pricing are equally important. It's not that growth is more important than pricing. What I find is generally, from my experience, about 90% of startups tend to underprice to start. And it's very difficult to increase price once you set a price and set certain expectations with your target customer or your audience. The good news is, obviously, pricing is actually not that difficult. So I'll kind of shed a lot of insights on that. It is not as like what a lot of consultants say, it's a thumb in the air, like rough guess kind of thing. There are very scientific ways to come up with pricing. So we'll cover some of that. And it's not as wishy-washy as you think it might be. So it's actually very clear cut. What I want to quickly kind of set the tone is, prior to even jumping into pricing in it, another one thing I want you to think about is you should build your business around yourself. So what I mean by this is, at the end of the day, certain types of pricing models or revenue models will be suitable for certain types of businesses. And there's no right or wrong answer. The reason why I say this is because I find that in the startup community, a lot of organizations tend to push or glorify the concept of the venture scale startup. So these are the startups that will raise capital, get a lot of investors, go global, and they're typically tech companies. I say at the end of the day, we're building businesses. And mom and pop shops, small businesses, restaurants, they're all equally important as well. So build a business around yourself. If you want to create a lifestyle business, that's absolutely fine. And if so, pricing might be very different from what you might see in a venture sale company. You might care a lot more about profit and a lot less about growth, and that is okay as well. So go with whatever is suitable for you and meets your own personal, financial goals as well. So let's talk about initial pricing first. So the first thing to understand is, when it comes to pricing, you have to actually start by defining your company value or brand. The reason why I say this is, if you look at this common question here, should I price $299 versus $300? There's no right or wrong answer here. But what you will find is that common knowledge or best practice is that $299 is perceived as better value, despite being very similar to $300. I mean, a lot of people nowadays have already caught up to that, and they kind of know that it's kind of a psychological trick, right? But at the end of the day, these things are common practices out there, but you have to understand why they are kind of the recommended way of going about. So if your company isn't focused on value, but if your company is in fact focused on quality, $299 communicates value. It does not communicate quality. So if you set your pricing or anything else, if you do anything in your business based on industry best practices or recommendation without understanding why it's relevant for your business, then you might end up doing things that are against your company values and mission. So start by really understanding, like, what is your company standing for? Once you know that, then it's very easy to make any decision, not just pricing decisions. So I won't go into how to define company values, but happy to chat about that if anyone has any questions. But the idea here is, if you really understand where your values come from, it will help inform the types of decisions that you'll make, be it pricing or anything else. So start with your values. If you know that you care about quality, then maybe 300 sends a better message and helps people understand that your company is about quality, not just about value. Make sense? Step 2, know your own goals. So values and mission is one, goals are another. So what are you trying to do at this current moment in time? Are you focused more on growth versus profitability? So if you're trying to grow, maybe you're willing to justify a lower price point and justify that lost revenue as an investment into marketing, because it reduces friction and it helps people adopt your product or service more quickly, right? Maybe that's what you're trying to do. Or in fact, maybe you're on the other side of things. Maybe you care a lot more about profitability and you want to maximize your revenue while minimizing your costs at all costs, and you're fine with slow growth. There's no right or wrong answer. It's all up to you. So keep those two things in mind when you decide to start your, or at least set your initial pricing. And lastly, don't try to reinvent everything. So what I mean over here is, I find that generally when I work with a lot of innovative entrepreneurs, they try to come up with a new solution to meet the market or solve a problem in a different way. But you don't need to reinvent everything. So you don't have to have a completely new business model. You don't have to have a new organizational structure. You don't have to do everything different. What I actually recommend is actually copy and mimic what your competitors are doing. That way, at least you're not having to mitigate so much risk. The only risky thing is your new product or service, and everything else is tried and true. And then obviously, yes, because your product or service is different, or yes, because your target market is different, they might react differently to different pricing or different marketing strategies. So I would say mimic first and then optimize later. Don't just try to do everything brand new from scratch. So start there. So if you're not too sure where to begin, look up at the market, see how they're pricing, what business model do they use? Are they subscription based? Are they freemium? Are they percentage of transaction? Are they selling data? Are they doing a one-off fee? Whatever it is, think about what is out there and just use what is tried and tested first, and then test and adjust after that. So here's what you need to do if you're trying to set your initial pricing. Step number one, or action number one, is go out there and mystery shop your competitor. What I actually recommend over here is to actually go through the process of buying, like put down money and buy your competitor's product or service. And when I say competitor here, sometimes some entrepreneurs say, you know what, I'm first in the market, there are no competitors. Number one, that's BS. There's always going to be someone else that is doing the exact same thing you're doing. Maybe not even in this country, maybe somewhere else, right? That there will be competitors. And number two is competitors are a lot more than direct competitors that do the exact same thing and serve your exact same customer. Sometimes there are indirect competitors that do the same thing but serve a different customer, or sometimes maybe they're serving the same customer but doing very different things, or maybe they're both. They're completely different, but they still compete for the same attention or budget for your customers. So I'll give you an example. So for example, if you are a restaurant, another restaurant could be a competitor. But if you think about it, food delivery services, even meal kit preparation kits, like those Good Foods, Fresh Prep, they're also your competitors because they also go for that same budget that is allocated for food that you spend every single month. Same if you're running a movie theater. Another movie theater could be a competitor, but even a bowling alley could be a competitor as well, because people go out to hang out with their friends. Where do they go? They go to movie theater, but sometimes if they don't feel like a movie, they'll go somewhere else, and it competes for the same entertainment budget as well. So think about those indirect competitors and just go out and buy their product or service and see and copy not only the pricing, but everything else. Look at how they're marketing, what channels they are on, and what is the process that they take to convert you into a customer. By doing so, you're setting your initial price based on what is the industry norm, what's in the current marketplace. So that's action number one. Action number two is to actually do it the other way. So instead of going after what is the current market best practice, is to actually go after what your customers think is reasonable to pay for it. So here is what we do in research term known as customer discovery. So if you've gone through any sort of MBA program or startup related incubation acceleration program, you've probably heard of the term. Customer discovery is where you go out and you interview your customers. And I strongly recommend in-person interviews, especially with pricing, over like a survey, which a lot of people tend to default to, because people tend to avoid confrontation and just prefer to go with whatever's more comfortable to them. So if you have done some customer discovery, typically what happens is in round one of customer discovery, you're focusing on understanding the problem, how people describe their pain, and then how you eventually position your solution and see how they perceive it. This is round two. So what I will assume is that by this point, you've already validated the market, you understand what their pain is, and you've already designed a solution that you know will solve their pain. So here you're going back, you can either go back to the people that you've already interviewed, or you can interview new people. And you want to ask them two questions. Number one is you want to ask them, the question number one is phrased on these three things. What is acceptable, what is expensive, and what is outrageous? And what you want to see is just you want to get a rough understanding of what ranges they're looking at. And there's, again, no right or wrong answer. You may want to start with the outrageous price point, even if it would alienate some of your customers, because maybe you might decide, okay, those are not my early adopters, and I actually want to target affluent people or a really high-end market. So if that's the case, then it's okay to start with that outrageous price as well. But the idea here is you just want to understand what is their tolerance level, what is acceptable for them, what's expensive, what's outrageous. And then the second thing is understand what do they normally expect. So what I mean by that is, do they normally pay by the hour? Do they pay a percentage from the transaction? How would they typically pay for this similar type of product or service? So I'll give one example. So I'm currently running a program out over in Yukon, and one of the entrepreneurs, he has invented this device that attaches on your ski bindings that allows you to climb uphill with skis. So you don't have to use the herringbone technique and go up this way. You can actually just go straight up, and it makes it a lot quicker. And what he's looking at is trying to figure out the same thing, like how do I set my initial price for my product? And it's complementary to skins. If you've seen ski skins, it gives you a bit more traction when you're going uphill, but they're not a direct competitor. People can still use skins with his special device that he's invented. But obviously, it's in the same category of product. It's an accessory that goes on top of a ski. So if people are normally paying, let's say, $300 for ski skins, whatever his product is, his invention. So I've seen it, but I'm not going to disclose because I'm not sure if he wants to have that public yet. Anyways, even though his device is small, he might not price at a really low price point. He might not say it's $30, because if that's the case, then people might have a different perception of value for the product. So if skins are typically priced at, let's say, $300, he might actually want to price more closely or more similar to skins so that people can understand it's a quality product. It's something that's not going to break down anytime you're on the mountain, and it will work and last a long, long time. So that's the idea here. You want to understand, what do people expect out of the product? Because it's not always best to be lower priced compared to your competitors. Because some people think that, oh, you know what, maybe I'll just price lower, I'll capture the market. But if you price too low, it might actually raise some red flags and make people question your quality or question the credibility. Like, why is it so cheap? Is there something wrong with it? Is it something that's not included? Whatever it is. So with this second methodology, so the first one is you're pricing based on what is in the current market. And then on this, you're basically trying to derive pricing from your customer. So if you ask, or actually if you do these two things, it should get you close to a rough place to start. And again, don't worry if you don't price correctly to begin with. There's no perfect way to price. And most companies will eventually need to adjust their pricing anyways. So this is just a starting point. One quick tip I want to say is I noticed that a lot of people, when they price, they tend to price based on cost. So what I mean by that is they say, okay, what is the cost of producing this product? Or what is the cost of servicing my customers? How many hours goes into it? How much is my marketing budget? All this kind of stuff. And a lot of people don't think enough about the value that they create. And the reason why I recommend pricing to include value in some way is because cost-based pricing typically doesn't scale. So what do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, if you run corporate workshops. So like me, you're speaking to an audience, and you say, okay, I'm going to charge my workshops based on the number of participants that I have. So I might say, okay, look, this event right now, I have 30 people. So I'm going to charge X amount of dollars to run a workshop. And let's say tomorrow, you suddenly have the opportunity to facilitate a workshop for Nike, a really large, reputable company that you definitely know has a much larger budget. Would you still price based solely on the number of participants, or would you want to price higher? Obviously, you want to price higher, because you know that if you just price based on how you currently price, you'll be leaving a lot of money on the table. So my recommendation is consider value-based pricing. What is the value that you're creating for the customer that you're serving, and price around that? I'll give you another example in a second. But value, these are the three things that you can think about when you're thinking about how can I create value or quantify value. So number one is generally, these are the three main categories, but there are other categories out there as well. But the three main ones is, number one is, can you help your customer make more money? If you can help them make more money, generally you can try to capture about 10 to 25% of the additional monthly income that you create for them. So that's a rough rule of thumb. Again, not a perfect number, just a rough rule of thumb. Number two, if you can help them save some money, then the idea here is you can probably charge anywhere from 10 to 15% of whatever they're saving a year. If you're helping your customers save time, then this is a bit trickier. What you want to try to do is you want to try to first quantify what your time is worth. So let's say you can say, okay, I'm going to help this lawyer save 20 hours a month in admin time. And you need to understand, like, what is their hourly rate worth? Like, what could they be doing with the extra time that they now have? So what is the opportunity cost associated with what they could be doing instead? And then if you understand what your time is worth, you can probably charge them about 10% of that missed opportunity cost, or whatever additional revenue they could make per month. So those are three rough ways to think about value creation. I'll give you another example. So I work with one company. they are a recycling company, and they would actually do recycling for music events and big festivals. And what they were doing is they were pricing purely based on that cost side of things as well. So they would, if they sit down for a project, they might say, okay, we're going to serve this festival. It's going to be 3 hours long. There's going to be X many attendees. It's going to be this big of a space. Therefore, we need 5 volunteers to work for 3 hours. And they're going to man this X number of bins around the location. And that's how they priced at first. And they found that as a nonprofit, they really couldn't scale. At the end of the day, they just have to keep surviving off new projects. And it wasn't really reflective of the type of events that they were serving. And the reason why that was happening is because, let's say if you have a 3-hour event, and let's say you're using a, for simplicity's sake, let's say 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer area for the event, right? So if you're serving 3 hours and 1K by 1K, maybe you need, let's say, 5 bins. So you're paying 5 volunteers 3 hours worth of pay, and that's a fixed rate. But what happens is, let's say you could have another event that's using same amount of space, but having a much higher volume of attendees. So it's much more crowded. They're throwing away much more items. There's more garbage. There's more recycling that's needed. But at the same time, you're still using the same number of volunteers for the same duration of time as well. And it doesn't scale as well. So I said, okay, think about how are you creating value for your customers? And they said, okay, for us, our customers, by actually having these type of recycling facilities at their events, they're able to better reduce costs, and it's also better for the environment. And what we are doing is they are winning when they get more attendees for their events. So we want to be able to win off their win as well. So with their winning, i.e. them getting more attendees, we want to be able to charge based on the number of attendees they have for the event, instead of thinking purely based on how long is the event and what is the size of the area that needs to be covered as well. So think about what is that value that you're helping for your customer, and you will usually find that pricing will better scale that way. So all that said and done, now you set your initial pricing. Again, like I mentioned, it's not going to be perfect at the start. You will have to tweak and adjust some things. So how do you optimize price? How do you figure out what is the right price? So here's my method. There are a few other methods out there, but the idea here is when you're thinking about raising pricing, there are 2 things that you want to track very closely. Number 1 is CAC, or it stands for customer acquisition cost. And then number 2 is LTV, lifetime value of your customer. Because what's going to happen is, as you increase pricing, it will become harder to get your customers. Maybe you will need to spend more money doing marketing, higher budgets. Maybe you'll even have to hire sales reps, because maybe your customers actually want to speak to someone before they're willing to drop that amount of dollar. So your customer acquisition cost will increase as your price increase. Number 2 is churn will also be affected, because the more expensive you are, the more likely they are to quit using your solution or switch to an alternative. So churn will increase, and with increased churn, typically lifetime value will go down. So you want to track these 2 things very closely, because you can have increased churn, but you can still also have high lifetime value. And I'll show you an example here. So this lady over here is Dr. Alexandra Greenhill, and she runs this company, My Best Helper. It's kind of like an Airbnb for parents to connect with babysitters and caregivers. So let's say if you're a parent, you're going out for a date night and you want someone to look after your kid, you go on a platform and you find a babysitter. So how she makes money is the babysitters pay a monthly fee to be on the platform to look for these jobs. When she started, the babysitters would pay $10 a month to be on the platform. And at $10 a month, on average, babysitters would stay and use the platform about 6 months. And that was pretty much maxed out. It's just because of the nature of babysitting. It's kind of a transitionary job. It's not like something that you do long term. So what she found is, at the time, $10 a month, 6 months, customer lifetime value is 10 times 6, $60. Make sense? So she started increasing pricing. And eventually she got to a point where she was actually charging $80 a month to the babysitters to be on the platform. But at $80 a month, obviously something's changed, right? Like I mentioned, cost of acquisition is going up, and then LTV is changing, churn is changing as well. So what she found is at $80 a month, instead of staying on the platform for 6 months, the babysitters would stay on the platform for an average of 3 months. So churn is much higher. Customers are leaving. Is that a bad thing? So think about what is the LTV. So LTV now is 3 months and your revenue per customer is 80 bucks. 80 bucks times 3, you're looking at $240, right? So the lifetime value of the customer instead of $60 is $240. So even though you have higher churn, your lifetime value of your customer can actually be higher because the pricing is also higher. So she found that was the sweet spot. Anything over 80, what she was seeing is that it just simply didn't make sense because it became too difficult to acquire the customers. And that's actually how she ended up, continuing to grow her business. So here's how you do it in a very exact way. So you need to actually have a spreadsheet to do this. And this is, again, going to be better for you if you've already launched, if you're in the market, you have a bunch of customers that you can do cohort testing with. So what you are going to be doing is column number 1 is you have your price. So step number 1 is, as you test your pricing, my first recommendation is to, at the very beginning, just double your price. Double, double, double. The reason why you want to start with double is because you don't know if you've underpriced by a huge margin. So let's say if people are familiar with, let's say, a $2,000 product, and right now you charge $50, you are hugely underpriced. And if you're hugely underpriced, say if you tweak your pricing like 50, 51, 52, 53, it's going to take you forever to get to that $2,000 mark. So start by doubling your price. So you can see here it's 50, 100, 200, 400, 800. Eventually you will get to that range where you can hone in and try to figure out like what within the range that your customer expects is kind of the best price. So what you'll do is you double the price. Second column is you track your customer life cycle. So your customer life cycle, or your churn rate. So you're seeing how long does a customer stay with you on average. So here you can see, oops, $50, they stay for 6 months. Then you calculate your LTV. So LTV is basically price times life cycle. So 50 times 6, 300 bucks. 100 times 6, 600 bucks. Second thing is you'll have another column here that tracks your CAC, customer acquisition costs. And what I want to say with CAC is it's going to be a bit harder to calculate this. CAC, you want to try your best to capture everything that goes into acquiring your customer. So that includes your marketing budget, but it also includes time and also salaries that go into getting activities that are related to getting your customers. So for example, let's say, for simplicity's sake, I'll give you one example. So let's say if you run a Facebook campaign and you spend $50 and it gets you 10 customers, then each customer is worth about $5. Make sense? That's your customer acquisition cost. But obviously it's not that simple, because what's going to happen is you have a marketing person managing the campaigns. Maybe you're going to have salespeople that have to speak to customers before they convert. Try to calculate all of that as well. And what you will do then is you might try to batch it based on cohorts. So for example, you might say, okay, in January, we got 300 new customers. And here's all our expenses in the month of January related to activities that touch on how we get our customers. So our marketing budgets, our marketing salaries, sales salaries, that kind of stuff. And from there, you say, okay, 300 customers divided by total amount that you spend, that is your customer acquisition cost. So now you know all these items. What you want to do, this is the magic. So you're trying to calculate this thing here called the LTV and CAC ratio. So what it is basically you take the lifetime value of your customer and you divide it by your customer acquisition cost. And the higher the number, the better. So you can see over here, 32 at 800 bucks. What that means is if you're charging $800 for your product or service, your customer is staying for 4 months, you can see lifetime value here is pretty high. So per customer, you're making about $3,200. And for the margin, for the amount that it costs to get the customer, $100 to get them, you're maximizing it at 32. That's the ratio there. So your goal is to try to find that high number, and that is going to be your sweet spot for pricing. Again, you can get really, really detailed with this once you understand what is the range. So you can, let's say if you know that the good range is between 800 to, let's say, 1,600. You can play around there. You can change, like, let's say, 850, 900, 1,000, 1,100, and slowly increase and play around until you find the best CAC to LTV ratio. So that's kind of how you get towards optimal pricing. Any questions here before I jump on?
We do have a question on the CAC.
Yep.
So that one is, how do you calculate CAC when you're not paying for ads?
So that's why I say it's usually a bit more difficult. You'll have to think about what are any activity related to acquiring customers that you are spending on. So sometimes it's not ads. So I'll give you an example. So myself, I don't do any ads. Most of my activities are, let's say, speaking engagements. I run courses, I create content, I write blog posts. So all of these are all acquisition related activities. So obviously you want to try to track your time for all of those. So I use a time tracker called Toggle. I can actually pull it up for you so you can see right now. So what you'll see is I'm actually tracking this workshop that I'm running right now as well. And what I'll do at the end of the month is I will look at this month, let's say last month, and I'll look at all of my activities. And what I will try to do is I'll pin down all of the activities that are related to acquiring customers. And then from there, I'll say, okay, last month, how many customers did I get? And then from there, I'll try to calculate the CAC. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
Kelly's asking LTV, right? So lifetime value, where it comes from is basically what is your price versus how long does your customer stay with you. So let's say if your customer is staying with you for 1 month and your price is $50, then the LTV is $50. But if the customer stays with you for 2 months, then 50 times 2, lifetime value of the customer is $100 instead of 50.
And I guess this is also in addition, kind of building on to what you answered, but how does the cost of delivery integrate into the LTV CAC calculation?
Yeah. Cost of delivery, it's not included here. And I would say you probably don't have to worry too much about it yet. The reason why I say that is because COGS typically falls under the category of pricing around cost. So what you want to do is in the start, when I talk about initial pricing, I mentioned two things. So you need to first understand what the market is willing to pay. Because regardless of COGS, if you have really high COGS and the market is only willing to pay a certain amount, then maybe you have something wrong with your manufacturing process or whatever your process is. So sometimes you might be able to reduce COGS, but at the end of the day, you need to first understand, like, number one, what is the market willing to tolerate? Or at least what is your specific target audience willing to tolerate? And then from there, you can optimize and figure out what is the best price based on acquisition strategy. COGS is usually something that is static, regardless of what your price is. And the reason why it's not important here in pricing because it's static, as you adjust your pricing, you don't even need to account for it. It's going to be the same thing anyways. So you will make more money if your LTV to CAC ratio is higher and your COGS is static.
Awesome, thank you. We do have a couple questions, but I think we can leave that for the next part.
So what about discounts? So sometimes you might have to discount in certain cases, and there's nothing wrong with discounting. And what I will say is a quick tip that I actually just recently learned last month around discounting. So I learn new things myself all the time as well, is think about, instead of reducing pricing, which is the common way of discounting, where you say like, oh, instead of $50, it's now $35. Instead of reducing price, which actually causes people to have a perception that the value is also decreasing, what you want to do is you want to think about how you can add value. So I'll give you one example. So this company that I was working with, and what they were doing for their packages, for their service, is the common way of people doing package pricing is they say, okay, package A is $100. Package B is instead of $200 for twice the amount of time, it's $180. So it's cheaper. Or package C, instead of paying $400, it's $300 for 4 times that amount of service. So what they did is, instead of doing that, they say, okay, package A is still $100. Package B is still $200. Package C is $400. But what we do to give that added value is, package A, you get $100, you get 10 hours of service. Package B, $200, you get 20 hours of service plus 3 free hours. Package C is $400, 40 hours of service plus 13 free hours of additional services. So instead of discounting, they're giving more value. So think about how you can do this in certain cases. Obviously, there are certain situations where it's unavoidable and you have to pull down pricing. So what I mean by that is, take COVID, for example. when COVID came around, some businesses couldn't afford certain services. So if that's the case, then what I would encourage you to do is I would still encourage you to stand firm on your pricing and think about other ways you can be creative with, giving your customers some flexibility around payment. So for example, maybe you might say, oh, you know what, we'll defer your payment, or maybe we can do a financing plan, or maybe, you know what, instead of worrying about pricing right now, what we'll do is we will do revenue share. So there are other creative ways that you can also kind of make it easy for your customer to pay in times of risk. A great example that I saw as well is in the 2008 recession, Hyundai, what they did is the car company Hyundai, they actually offered a job loss guarantee. So what they said is, okay, if you lose your job, but you still want to buy a car, what you can do is buy the car. If you lose your job, you can return your car, no questions asked. And this actually allowed them to capture a much larger market share and leapfrog over their competitors. Because at the time, it wasn't about the money. People were more concerned about that risk, like, oh, what if I lose my job? Although obviously not a lot of people actually lost their jobs than that they think they would. So same with, let's say, COVID, for example. Like at the start of the pandemic, a lot of business thought that everything was going to go to hell. And then lo and behold, some businesses are actually thriving right now. Like you can see, let's say real estate, for example. Real estate agents were really concerned because they were worried that without showings, they couldn't sell houses, they would lose a lot of business. And then the reverse actually happened because mortgage rates came down. And then people are trying to move to different places. People care a lot more about their home environment since they've been working from home for such a long time now. So housing sales actually boomed. And in that case, you want to be able to capture some of that. So don't purely reduce pricing just for the sake of reducing pricing. I think that kind of makes a point there. So maybe I'll touch on a few other things. So if you discount as well, some basic psychology around discounting. There's a difference between absolute versus a percentage discount. So what you want to do is if your price is less than $100, then what you want to do is you want to go for a percentage. So let's say if your price, at $99, you might say, okay, 20% off. That 20% off sounds like a big number. If your price over 100, it's better to use absolute value. So for example, let's say if your product is $250, you would say $25 off. $25 off sounds bigger than that 10% off. Make sense? So if you have to use this type of discounting, then keep that in mind when you think about pricing psychology. So let me just quickly check questions and then I'll talk about optimizing growth.
All right. We do have a few questions that are kind of more general, but to answer, yes, I guess, these ones. Sure. So what advice would you give to service providers like trainers, coaches, or consultants when considering pricing?
Same, I would really recommend that you focus on the value that you're creating for your customers. So try to quantify that. It's going to be a bit harder at the start. So at the start, that's why I say don't worry too much. Start with what is the market norm or what your clients or customers are comfortable and familiar with. And then from there, you want to think about, what are you doing for your customer? It really depends, right? Are you a fitness coach? Are you a business coach? So for myself, for example, I do sales revenue consulting. What I'll typically do is I'll think about, like, if I work with this new company, how much additional income can I make for them? How much additional revenue? What is the rate of growth that I expect from them? Can I actually capture and bring them up to performing speed within 3 months? Is it 6 months? And from there, I'll think about how to price around some element of revenue sharing. And I'll also have a flat project fee, which is the typical industry norm. So that's kind of how I do my own pricing, but it really depends. So that question is a bit broad. I don't know what business you run. But yeah, I hope that helps. So I'm sorry, I'm quickly going to answer one Zoom question that I see. So calculating LTV is a very time-consuming task. So yes, LTV is time-consuming, and LTV is also hard to calculate if you are just a brand new startup. You will have to have at some point have a certain number of volume and certain consistency around churn and how long your customers stay with you. So that's why I say pricing optimization usually happens after you've already, gone out there, kind of at the stage where you have a bit of that business model fit, where you know that your business model is a suitable model, that pricing is kind of okay, people are paying, and now you want to tweak it to kind of start to scale and maybe become a larger company. how long should we wait to make sure LTV is spot on? I'd say, if you're seeing consistent, churn rates month over month for at least, 3 to 4 months, you can probably start thinking about this. Yeah. Sorry, Yoki, any questions from your end?
So we have another one where they're asking what percentage of users stay on a free plan when offered the option for that. So they've heard it's about 80 to 90%.
Yes, about 80-90%, but also depends on how you tier your free plan. So actually, let me just cut to this. I might repeat it later, but what you want to do with freemium models is the general freemium tiering is based on feature tiering. So what they do is they say, okay, free tier, you get all of these features for free. And then you have a pro tier where you get certain additional features like, photo editing or blah, 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 blah. But the idea is you upgrade to use all these additional features. I'm not a fan of freemium based on features. The reason why is because your upgraded tier, you're assuming that people need the pro version, that people are not satisfied with the free version. And these are your power users that need all these additional features. So all these additional features, you actually need to do another round of customer discovery to figure out if those are the right features. And I find that a lot of companies tend to get into what we call feature creep, where they just build a lot of new features, and some of the new features are really not worth that investment because they don't really capture or convert your customers as quickly or as easily as you think it will. What I recommend is if you have to do freemium, you want to do what we call volume-based tiering. So the idea here is you might say, okay, at a free tier, you get all the features, but you only get a certain volume. So I'll give you one example. So one tool that I use is called Yet Another Mail Merge. It's a tool that allows you to send mass emails through your Gmail using your Google Spreadsheet. And the reason why I use that over a MailChimp or anything else is because typically if you send marketing campaigns, they will go into promotional folders. So if you're doing sales outreach, sales emails, you want to make sure that your emails actually end up in someone's inbox rather than going to that spam or promotion folder. And it's really unavoidable. Like if you send with a MailChimp, a HubSpot, Salesforce, ActiveCampaign, whatever you name it, if you send with a third-party mailing client, about only 20% of your emails will end up being read by a customer. And there is nothing you can do to increase the number because of the nature of how it's being sent. It's being sent by another server. It's going to typically go out into that promotional folder because a lot of other people are also receiving emails from those servers. Sorry, I digress. But anyways, Yet Another Mail Merge, they allow you to send emails from your inbox. And what happens there is they give you full feature. You can send up to 50 emails a day for free. And then after that, you have to upgrade. And usually if you're in sales, you'll know this. If you send any sort of outreach campaign, you're typically sending more than 50 emails. So what I often find myself doing is, I'll send, and then after the 50 emails, I'm like, crap, I need to send more, and then I just upgrade. And that conversion from free to pro typically happens within a few minutes. It's not like you have that 14-day free trial and congratulations, now your sales cycle is a minimum of 14 days because people will use the free as long as they can. And then after they think about converting after. Or, you have the problem with people don't convert because they want those additional features. Now people are using it. They find full value in your product or service. They just want more of it. Another great example is MailChimp. MailChimp, you get to use MailChimp for free. You get all the features. And after 2,500 contacts, then you have to upgrade and start paying them. And the payment kind of pricing model also depends on the number of contacts that you have in your mailing list. The more contacts you have, the more you're paying every month. So I'm personally, I favor that model of pricing around freemium. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. One more question, I guess, before we move on there. So how often should companies be adjusting their pricing based on inflation or other factors to strike the balance between consistency and profit margins?
Great question. It really depends on the type of business you have and the amount of attention you can afford to spend on pricing. So if you're a startup, I'd say don't worry too much about optimizing pricing. Just start with whatever is most familiar and comfortable for your customers, which is why I talked about doing that initial market research, mystery shopping your competitors, understanding what your competitors price at. Customer discovery is something you should always be doing. And if you're constantly doing customer discovery, then ideally you should also really understand, what's happening in the industry, what's happening to your consumers, your customers. And, maybe if you find that, oh, let's say, for example, with COVID, if you understand that, oh, people are currently no longer able to afford your services, then you can quickly adjust accordingly. So ideally, if you're constantly having your ear to the ground and listening to your customers, then you shouldn't have that problem and you should be able to quickly adjust your pricing at any time. But when you start to grow and scale, then I'd say, like, when you're at a stage where you've raised some funding, you're 50 plus employees, then you can start to really have someone dedicated just to pricing and revenue to play around with those numbers, to really focus on maximizing everything as much as you can.
All right, thank you. I think we still have some time for you to continue, and there is a question for asking what the tools you mentioned were, but maybe we can round that up if we mention any more tools later.
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Oh, thanks. So let's talk about growth quickly, because growth is also related to pricing, because obviously the more customers you have, the more money you make, right? So engines of growth, if you've read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, he's talked about the three main ones, so paid, viral, and sticky. So what are paid, viral, and sticky, and when do you use it? What type of business is it suitable for? Paid is generally the most common form of acquisition or growth. So paid includes, ads, display advertising, banners, going out to conferences, anything that is out there where you're paying some money to get your customers. That is what we call the paid engine of growth. Paid engine of growth is good for a certain type of business, and it's not good for a certain type of business. So ads will work very well if your product or service is something that is easy to describe and is visual. So if you are a consultant or coach, you are out of luck here. And the reason why I would say this is because, God forbid, I don't care what you think, most consultants and coaches, they are actually a lot more similar to their competitors than they think they are. And usually most of them, they come up to me and they say, yeah, you know what, but I have better customer service. I am much more, like, you don't know. Everyone says the same thing. Everyone says they have better customer service than their next door neighbor. So at the end of the day, if you have a product or service that is easily understood, can be visually described with either words, text, images, then you can consider paid. If not, if you're either struggling to define your value proposition, struggling to differ from your competitors, or if you're really innovative, where let's say you created a new solution that people simply don't understand, that they have to really try it out to really understand how it's different, then you don't want to use paid. So what's the alternative? The alternative is a viral. So what I mean by viral here is not about viral marketing, because there's no easy formula to design a viral campaign to make a video go viral. The idea behind viral is word of mouth. So there are certain companies out there, like myself included, I am a consultant. I actually don't do any paid advertising. So with the viral growth engine, what you're doing is you're relying primarily on referral, word of mouth. This will work very well for you if people have to experience your product or service in order to understand the value of it. So one example or two examples here is Landmark Forum. Some of you might have heard of them. Some of you might think they're a cult. And I would say kind of. I've actually been through one of their programs just out of curiosity to see like what exactly goes on. And what I would say is a lot of these personal development programs, the reason why they don't have to do any advertising is because they have that experience. People go through, they get that life-changing experience. They realize, their blind spots. They realize that they were having false perceptions about their relationships and blah, 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 blah. And then they come open and their eyes are open. And because of that amazing experience, they are strong advocates for the program. And strong to the point where if they're not guided correctly, then they actually become a bit pushy. I'm sure some of you have met people who have been for a Landmark or PSI and say, hey, you have to join this program. It's going to change your life. But the idea here is it's because of that. So what they actually try to do is they empower people to make referrals in different ways. And how do they do that? They actually engineer it into the program itself. So if you look at, let's say, a Landmark program, you actually have certain open nights where you can bring a guest and the guest can actually see what you're sharing. So sorry, I'm speaking of it as if it's a cult, but to be honest, like if you go through a program like this, a lot of these programs, they're based on really good psychological methodologies. I'm actually a psych major myself. So there is a lot of value there, but sometimes people are not coached on how to support people and bring other friends through a program like this, and they come across sharing it the wrong way, and sometimes it comes across as being a bit pushy. So anyways, so they engineer in the program, they actually have those open nights where people can bring a guest, and then you can see like how other people are transforming through the program, and you might say, oh, you know what, I want to have that sort of transformation for myself, and then they want to join. Or they also have things where, in the program, you can actually write down the name of a guest that you also want to change your life for, and they will help you reach out to that person if you're uncomfortable doing that sort of process yourself. Another example is Dropbox. Dropbox, they actually found, and I actually heard one of the talks from Drew, who's the founder. He was actually speaking and saying, what they were doing marketing and ads, and they were finding that despite all of the advice from consultants and their investors saying that, hey, you need to spend more money on marketing, they just simply found that marketing was not cutting it out for them. And what they found is no matter how much they spent on marketing, their growth rate was still more or less kind of consistent regardless of the marketing budget. And they found that it was because people were still marketing wasn't effective, but people were still sharing via word of mouth. So what they actually did is they created some campaigns and changes to the product to actually encourage people to share more. So what happened is, let's say, for example, if you've ever used Dropbox in the early days, you might remember, or if you refer a friend, you get 250 megabytes extra space, and your friend also gets 250 megabytes extra. And it's part of the onboarding experience as well. Like when people jump on, and then what happens is you actually, I don't have this as a screenshot, I should put it in, but they have a screen where you can actually enter your email address. It'll pull up your contact list for you, and you can send an invite. So they make it as easy as possible for you to send that referral link, so that people will actually jump on the Dropbox. So you're generally trying to encourage people to share and make it as easy as possible for people to share with others as well. So that's the viral engine of growth. So again, this will work better for you if it's hard to describe the value of your product or service until people experience it, or if your product or service is really innovative and people can't grasp the concept until they actually try it out. The third engine of growth is the sticky engine of growth. So the sticky engine of growth is primarily centered around retention. So if you have good retention, then technically, even if your acquisition is constant, if you have good retention, you will still grow as a company. But what you'll find is you actually want to aim for growth that is more like that hockey stick growth on the right side, right? So what you want to do is you don't just want to have regular retention, you actually want to have negative churn. So with negative churn, what that is basically, yes, people are staying with you and you're improving your retention, but you're actually increasing the lifetime value of your existing customers as well. So that means that you're upselling them, you're cross-selling them, you're giving them more value over time, so that you're capturing more from your existing customers and increasing that lifetime value as you go. So if you do that, then you can still grow. So what I'll say here is there are three types: paid, viral, and sticky. You don't have to use all three of them, but sometimes you won't just be using one as well. You can use multiple. You can use a blend. You could use all three. You could use one or two, but there will be certain types that work better for certain businesses. For sticky, pretty much applicable for any company that has long-term customers that are on subscription. But yeah, those are some engines of growth. So let's quickly talk about revenue. I know I'm kind of running out of time here, but any questions, I'll give you my email at the end. Just send me an email with the questions. I'll touch on a few more things because I want to make sure I cover everything. So how do you maximize your revenue? We've talked about increasing price. So we've talked about point number 4. We've talked about a bit on increasing number of customers. So let's kind of cover 1, 2, and 3. So customers, average transaction size, and frequency. So increasing number of customers, number 1, you want to test your channels. How are you, or where are you getting your customers? Are they on Facebook, LinkedIn? So you want to test which are the right channels, which channels convert the best, which channels cost the least for you to get your customers. Maybe you want to try and experiment with different target markets. Maybe you're going after different verticals. Maybe you're expanding to a different region. Maybe you're retargeting. So instead of worrying about getting more customers, there are some customers that you have already gotten but have not converted. So these are people who drop off your funnel, what we call funnel leak. So you're trying to retarget them. So for example, if they landed on your website but did not add an item to a shopping cart, or they added an item to a shopping cart but did not hit the checkout button. So how can you serve these customers and retarget them? So you might notice, like if you've been to some websites, like if you go on Nike.com, suddenly you notice everywhere on Facebook and Google, you see Nike ads. That's retargeting in effect. So you want to try to capture some of those customers that missed out. You can also do retargeting, not just through ads, but also through email campaigns as well. Like if someone added an item but did not check out, you can send them an email. Hey, you left an item in your shopping cart. Did you forget to check out or something like that, right? Excuse me. Leveraging referrals. How can you get more word of mouth? Like I mentioned, thought leadership, so content. And lastly, this might be more long-term, but thinking about regulatory compliance. So for example, there's this one entrepreneur I know. He runs this company that deals with embodied carbon. So what he basically does is people, when they're designing green buildings, they look at the materials that go into the building, and they look at how the building is designed, how energy savings, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. But they don't really consider what happens to the materials before it actually gets to the construction site. So is it ethically sourced? What's the carbon footprint of getting that material to the location, of producing the material? So that's basically what he's focused on, more on the first half of the process. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to make changes to LEED certification, which is the building code certification. I don't know what it stands for, LEED, but he's trying to change the certification requirements to include elements around embodied carbon, around the materials before they actually get to the job site. So obviously, if the the regulation goes through, then it will facilitate much larger adoption for this product or service. So the idea here is, if you have that type of product or service where you can benefit from some sort of regulatory change, then think about how you can do that. It's more of a long-term thing. It's not going to happen very quickly, though. So that is increasing number of customers. Number two, increasing transaction size. Average transaction size, I talked about upsell. So if you're not familiar with upselling, it's basically you're selling a more expensive variant of the same product. So for example, you might say, hey, selling a 40-inch TV, maybe you actually need a bigger 60-inch TV. Same thing, bigger product, right? So that's the upsell, same version. Cross-sell is where you're selling similar but different products. You might say, hey, instead of buying a bike and upselling to a more expensive bike, you might say, oh, you need a helmet, you need a water bottle holder, you need a pannier rack, that kind of stuff. So that's cross-sell. So think about where you can include some of these upsells and cross-sells to increase your average transaction size. The longer a customer spends on your store or website, the more they spend with you as well. You can use bundles. You can use things like free shipping thresholds, or discounts on minimum purchase or volume discount. You might say, you get a 20% discount if you spend $80 or more. So it increases, it encourages people to spend more with you. So the idea here is the more they spend, obviously, the higher the lifetime value of the customer and the more you make from them. Cross-selling, a quick tip here.
I guess just to interrupt you real quick, we are approaching the end of our session, and I'm not sure how much extra stuff there is, but if you have any questions, I guess. Okay, cool.
Yep. So a quick tip on cross-selling is some people feel uncomfortable about it. My number one recommendation is that's because your goal is to increase revenue. If your goal is to help your customer maximize value, you'll usually find yourself more comfortable with positioning additional features or items. So always think about the customer's best interest, not your best interest. And when do you offer a cross-sell is think about what is the milestone for a customer. If a customer has a positive experience, i.e. that's a milestone that you can define, that's usually a good time to come in and have that additional offering. So I won't touch too much on this. Frequency of transaction I talked about. So how can you get people to, now they're buying more, but how can you get them to buy more often? So recurring revenue is one. Think about, maybe there's a way for you to create some sort of membership plan or break it down where it's subscription. The more you are on top of their mind, the more they will remember you. So one example here is there's this company called Push Operations in Vancouver. They sell software for people in the hospitality industry. It's an accounting software. Accounting is once a year. They switch and pivoted towards doing payroll. Payroll is bi-weekly. And because people are using their software bi-weekly now, it's more top of mind and people remember. And that actually increases the frequency of transactions. People are actually paying them more often. They're less likely to switch to a competitor as well. Refills, loyalty programs. How can you track and get people to come back? So you notice like restaurants, 10 meals, you get one free meal. That encourages them to come back again, right? Encourages them to come more often as well. Have releasing new models, iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that encourages frequency of transaction as well. Don't release new models just for the sake of releasing a new model. Like that might be environmentally unfriendly. Focus on quality. Because if your customers catch wind that you're decreasing quality just to get new models out the door, then it can negatively affect you. So 1 minute left. Here's my email. Any questions? Shoot me an email.
Awesome. And thank you so much, Chin, for doing the session and all the attendees for attending.